Hey guys, Greg here from LensProToGo, and today we're testing out the new Canon 70-200 CNE in a real-world test. We're putting it up against the 70-200L version 2 to see how they stack up optically. Let's take a deeper look at some of these shots in Lightroom and see what we got. Okay, so here we are in Lightroom, and I've pulled a few of the photos to analyze a little bit deeper. First, let's start with this shot of the building that was right behind me in the intro to check out the center sharpness of both lenses. This was at 70mm at f4 on both lenses and an ISO of 400. The CNE version is on the left and the L version 2 is on the right. I'll try to keep this the same throughout the whole video so you don't get confused. Now, if we jump into a 1-to-1 zoom, right off the bat, it doesn't look like there's much of a difference. And from this alone, I wouldn't be able to tell them apart. There is a ton of detail on both of these shots. But if I drag over towards the side, you might start to notice, like with this lamp in this window right here, that there's definitely more detail with the CNE lens over the L lens. Let's change up the shot and go to the same photo, but now at 200mm, the extreme for both of these lenses. Now, one way to really tell the sharpness is to look for some sort of lettering or text that could be discernible in one of them and not the other. For this photo, it's actually in this sign that's on the door. If I jump into 3-to-1, the words on the sign are much more legible, still not fully, but I can make out most of it using the CNE lens, and almost none of it besides the caution, the big lettering, on the L lens. Now, I know this is zoomed in a crazy amount, but that's really how far you have to dig into this lens to start to see a difference in center sharpness. Let's go to another shot and take a look at the edges. I shot this as parallel as I could get it to have the focal plane fall right on the brick wall, and it would be the same through the whole frame to make sure it actually was the sharpness of the lens that was falling off and not just depth of field. With this shot in the center again, it's very comparable for sure, but again, as I start to head towards the edges, I can see a loss in detail, especially on the ledge right here. And going deeper into the corner, you can see that more and more on the L version, while the CNE does a great job at keeping it sharp. Look in the blinds right here. The other thing to look at while we shoot straight onto this wall is vignetting and if there's any exposure shift. So as I toggle between the two, you can definitely see some vignetting on the edges of the CNE, and it's not really that bad. You don't get those really dark corners, but there is definitely a roll-off of exposure. The other thing is there is a whole overall exposure shift. If you get into the development tab, you can look at the histogram in the top right corner, and if I toggle again back and forth between them, you can see that histogram jumping up and down between the two shots. And right below it, you can see the settings to make sure they are exactly the same. ISO is 3200 at 70mm, f4 at 1/250th of a second. Next up, let's look at chromatic aberration with this shot of the river and the building with the bright sky above it. Going into a 1-to-1 and looking around the shot where the darker objects hit the sky, you should be able to see a little bit of color fringing or chromatic aberration. Both of these lenses do a really good job at handling this undesirable effect. And even in these little tree branches, you can start to see some magenta, but it's really not bad at all. As I go over to the clock tower, and if we punch into 3-to-1, you can really start to see this effect on the left side of the clock tower and the right side of the roof right here. But again, they are both really good at handling this chromatic aberration. If you do look at the CNE, it does look to be a little bit more vibrant in the magentas, but they are very, very close, something you would barely see with either lens. Now, the CNE lens only being a t4.4, there have been some questions about bokeh compared to the 2.8 on the L lens. But before I go into that, here are both of the lenses at f4 to get an equal comparison. And going into the bokeh area, it looks very similar. The L version having a little more rounded bokeh than the CNE, but both are really clean. Now I'll switch the L version 70-200 to wide open at an f2.8, and the bokeh size is a little bit bigger, but you start to lose the roundness like we saw at f4. And lastly, for the photo portion, there's a pretty big color shift between the two lenses. White balance was locked to 5300 Kelvin, and as I go back and forth between these two shots, you can clearly see there is a shift to warmer tones on the CNE. I personally really like the look, and it's really good for skin tones, but not so much for having really pure whites. But it is such a slight amount that you could easily change this in post. So that's going to be it for the photos. If you guys want to download them, I've linked to a Google Drive in the description down below. I also have a couple video clips that I want to show you where I compare the breathing and image stabilization between the two lenses. These are a little bit trickier to match between each shot, but I'll do my best. So here is the breathing test of the CNE, and if you look on the right at the tree as I rack focus, you can almost see it completely coming into the shot. And here it is on the L version doing that same focus move, and you can see almost the exact same amount of breathing. The last thing I'm going to show you is the IS performance between the two. So at 200mm on the CNE, trying to handhold and keep this flower right in the center of the frame. And then here it is at 200 millimeters on the L version, doing the exact same thing. So for the breathing test, they're almost identical and they're giving the same amount of zoom from close focus to infinity. And for the IS performance, I would say that the CNE did a little bit better job holding the position, but the L version is still very good. So now I leave it up to you to decide if you need the upgrade. I think if you already own the L version and you don't need the servo motors and you want to keep that glorious f2.8 aperture, then you'll be fine with the lens that you already have. And if you need those servo motors, you don't have to worry about giving up any quality and maybe even gaining a slight edge using this new 70-200 CNE. If you want to give either of these lenses a shot, head on over to LensProToGo.com. There will be a link to both of them in the description down below. That's going to be all for today. Thanks so much for sticking around. And if you enjoyed this video, make sure to give it a like and also subscribe if you want to see more. I put up new videos every week. I'll see you guys in the next one.